This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. Remember that part. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and I am so grateful to have this place to talk about faith and politics and big ideas in our culture, including the fact that great journalism is being done by a number of excellent reporters and a number of up-and-coming, top-notch journalists. But as you know, we speak with all kinds of interesting, accomplished folks from across the spectrum, people of goodwill who come in good faith. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And you know the drill. Subscribe to our program or follow us depending on the app. And of course, it really does mean a ton if you could rate us and even leave a review on your podcast app. And mostly tell somebody about what we're doing here. Bring it up with a neighbor or a friend from church or your brother or sister or whoever and say, hey, I was listening to this podcast talking politics and religion without killing each other, and they were talking about the fact that there's good journalism being done. There are good reporters, or whichever episode you like to bring up, the one with Larry Wilmore, or Dr. Russell Moore, or Jen Rubin of the Washington Post. Speaking of the Washington Post, we got a special treat today. So many great conversations. Anyway, you know the drill. Subscribe, rate, review, tell somebody. All of that helps get the word out so more people can participate in the conversation like the one we're having today with Mariana Alfaro. Mariana Alfaro is a politics reporter at the Washington Post covering breaking news and was one of the two reporters behind Post Politics Now, the Post's live breaking politics news feed. She joined the Post in 2019 as a researcher for the Daily 202, the newspaper's flagship politics newsletter. And before that, Mariana worked as an intern for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Insider, and the Texas Tribune. A native of San Salvador, Mariana graduated from Northwestern University's Medill School. Mariana, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. All right, so you have to clear something up for me, and this is really quite pressing. Are you in your normal Nespresso season, or are you doing French press at the moment?
I'm doing the French press. One of my colleagues, she was like, don't go back to Nespresso, and I have not touched it again.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's gross.
You know, so in all seriousness, there isn't much I still love about Twitter, but your Twitter feed is an absolute delight. I learned, what did I learn? About Rat Girl Summer, mustard Skittles and the perils therein. So how do you approach your Twitter feed? Obviously, you're sharing stories, some of your own stories, other stories that you find interesting. But what is your approach to engaging on that platform?
Yeah, I think I have a very millennial approach to Twitter. I feel like now that it's known as X, it's kind of losing that power it has, or that hold it has on us journalists, because I feel like, you know, especially in the breaking news world, you're always scouting for like some congressman's statement or like, you know, whatever the White House is tweeting. And we still use it on that sense. But for me, there's a fine line between, you know, Twitter is at the end of the day more entertainment focused, more like, you know, quick, witty, funny bits, but also it's still a place where my work exists and it's still a place that I need to be professional in. So, you know, I try to stay away from very opinionated, you know, try not to, you know, go one way or the other, but I definitely also use it as a place where I can just be funny and kind of put my thoughts out there. And sometimes, you know, I feel like it's a very Gen Z millennial thing to be always craving attention from the internet. So I will put some silly things there and hope that someone will find it funny and like it.
Mustard Skittles is a very serious business. Yes. So it was,
yeah, that I saw that line. It was here at City Center in DC that they were like giving away these mustard Skittles. And I was like, it was the day after Trump's third indictment, and I was like, this is somehow, you know, more newsworthy than the indictment.
It's so funny. Yeah, there's so much there. There's like, oh, I guess I have to change my running route now. And, you know, there's just so many different things on there. It's really cool. So you grew up in El Salvador. Mm-hmm. Did you specifically come to the States to go to school? And was journalism something you were specifically wanting to pursue? Or how did that all come about?
Yeah, I grew up in El Salvador. I was there until I was 18, you know, went through K through 12. I went to an American school, so the American School of El Salvador. It's very much, you know, U.S.-centric education. I've been speaking English since I was 3 years old. And we are raised very much with this idea of American culture, American history. And throughout all that time, I was definitely very privileged to be in that school. It's definitely, one of those things that I really thank my parents for, because they really put in a lot of effort to, afford that. But I, had excellent American teachers who, really raised me on excellent literature, excellent, journalism. They would hand me copies of the New Yorker when I was in like middle school. And I think that started sparking something in my brain. Journalism is not a career that I think a lot of people are rushing to get into in El Salvador. I think that definitely it's one of those things where we really need good journalism in El Salvador. We definitely, want to continue supporting that. And I think that, great journalism there would do miracles for our democracy, but it wasn't a thing that kids were encouraged to do. And I was very lucky to have the right teachers and guidance in my life, and also very supportive parents who said, if you want to be a journalist, if you want to write, the job opportunities are not the same as if you were an engineer, but if that's what you want to do, go for it. And I think that I got into it just being like, I want to be able to, report on what's going on in El Salvador, what's going on in Latin America. And then I had the wonderful opportunity to go to Northwestern University, and that's kind of how I ended up here.
Yeah. You bring up a really interesting point, because you have the perspective of growing up in another country whose democracy is more fragile, to say the least. But in you talking about journalism, having a more robust fourth estate, that it would be healthy for a democracy. So for those of us engaged citizens who are concerned about the health of journalism in America, is that overblown, or do we have reason to be concerned about where it's gone, especially, when we have, I was going to bring this up later, but, enemy of the people and that sort of mindset being thrown around left and right?
I definitely think that, losing basic journalism, and not only, the Washington Post and New York Times, the big newspapers of the world, but just like the local newspapers, losing the local sources, the city hall reporting, the city council reporting, that makes a big difference. That starts impacting democracy directly the moment that more local newspapers shut down. And I think that in El Salvador, we have had two major newspapers my entire life, and they've always been, not the best funded. They've never been, with the few journalists they've had, they've tried to, keep politicians accountable, but the fact that they don't have the respect they deserve, they don't have the support from the readers that they deserve, that there's not that desire to, continue funding journalism. I could definitely tell that is directly related to, the crumbling of democracy. And, it's not only El Salvador, it's happening across Latin America, where if you don't have strong journalism, a lot of these politicians start, chipping away at our democracies. And, coming here in the United States, I got here in 2014, and right at the time when all of this started happening here, and I was like, Jesus Christ, not here too, when you're starting to have, local papers shut down, and, reporters not being able to continue following and pressuring these lawmakers and people in power, you can definitely start telling that things start going sideways.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your process and your evolution as a writer, as a reporter. You were so prolific at Northwestern as a reporter, as a managing editor, even a opinion editor for the daily Northwestern's newspaper. Is that where you learned how to write, or was it more when you got to, I think Texas Tribune was one of the first major stops that you had. Yeah. Is that where you learned the craft of writing?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was actually thinking about it earlier today. But I definitely, the Daily Northwestern was my whole education. I'm glad I went to Northwestern. I took a lot of excellent classes, had great professors. Medill is an excellent journalism school, but my main classroom was the Daily. And, being taught by other people my age too. I mean, we were, 20-year-olds running a newspaper, and that's the kind of experience and power and just exposure that we are not going to have for a while, until maybe one day we become editors again when we're like 45 or 50. But it's that thing where I was, covering some of the biggest stories on this campus that actually got nationwide attention. And when you're 19 and you're on deadline and you also have to do your homework, it was very intense, and it really prepared me to do the kind of work I do now when I am on deadline every other hour sometimes, when I have to rush and make sure that things are all okay and that we can get this up in the next 15 minutes. That was definitely, I think, where I really learned my chops. And again, it wouldn't have been the same if I hadn't had the professors I had at Northwestern. I definitely had top tier Medill journalism professors there. But it was actually being able to put that theory into practice and doing the newspaper. And that's why I say, like, college journalism is so important. It's really important also that we continue funding that, because for us, the Daily Northwestern was the local paper in Evanston. Like, that's the newspaper that held the Evanston lawmakers accountable, the Evanston community accountable. And I think that local, like, college newspapers do that across the country. I don't know if you've seen headlines recently, but the Daily Northwestern was the one behind uncovering all of the stuff in the football team and the baseball team at Northwestern, led to the, dismissal of the coach. And I think that kind of journalism, that, these are just kids doing it. It's incredible. And I'm really hopeful for the future, if we continue training journalists like that.
Interesting. So you really had an opportunity at the Daily at Northwestern, all the mechanics of nurturing relationships with possible sources and, the writing of it. And one aspect that was really clear, I loved reading, there was that semester when you were an opinion editor, and I loved reading some of those columns. Is op-ed something you'd like to get back to, or are you a reporter now through and through at this point?
I think I'm a reporter now through and through right now. And I think it'll be like that for the next few years of my career. I don't know if I have it in me to do opinion again, because it was bearing my soul to the world, And actually, one of my colleagues who I admire a lot of the Post, James Holman, he and I did the Daily 202 together, the politics newsletter, a few years ago. And he left that job to go do opinion. And now he writes incredible opinions for the Post. And he also runs a lot of our, whenever something big happens, he's on the live show giving his thoughts and everything. And that man is an encyclopedia of knowledge. So I feel like I would only go do that once I achieve that level of just knowing so many things. But it was a thing that I think I would go more towards the more like book focus. Like at some point I would like to, delve a little bit deeper into just the experience of coming here and writing about politics as a person who's not American and has never really followed American politics growing up. But that I think is a very down the road kind of idea, because I do like being able to put more emotion into what I'm writing and putting out there, more thought. But right now I really love just the world of breaking politics and everything, just following every single political thing that happens in the U.S. And I think I'm going to stick to that for the near future.
That's interesting. So you could see yourself writing longer form at some point, specifically nonfiction, or would you ever write like the great American novel or the great San Salvadoran novel?
Yeah, I actually got into journalism because I wanted to be a fiction writer, and I was like, well, I need to make money. Like, I can't go and get another second. So my parents were like, yeah, I think journalism is the right choice here. And again, I have friends who are writers and who are, trying to get their novels out, and that seems like a very hard, very expensive thing to do, and I feel like not right now. But, one day I'm hoping to be able to get back to that. But I mean, this job is 24/7 almost, every time something breaks, like we got to be on it. And I feel like I love it. I love the fast pace, but I don't really get a chance to sit back and be like, let me be creative for a little second and delve into fiction.
Yeah, I definitely want to add, I have lots of questions for you about the Post, but one other question, were there certain pieces that were harder to write than others when you were doing opinion for Northwestern, for the Daily? There was one that you did, I think you co-wrote it with your colleague there, where you were encouraging Northwestern students to continue speaking up in the midst of the Me Too movement. Were there certain pieces that were really a lot harder for you to write than others?
Yes, I think pieces where I clearly had something to say about an issue, but I wasn't directly connected to it. I mean, obviously, the Me Too movement was at its, I guess, peak, or it was really, dominating headlines when I was at Northwestern, and so it was kind of easy to write about it just because it was something that I feel like it unfortunately is a universal experience for women to just kind of have to deal with these things. But there were other issues that I, had some connection to, but I hadn't been personally impacted by it. And I think that that's where I crossed the line of being like, well, I still have like a thought on this. I still have opinions, but how do I go around it without, making myself the focus of it, or like without having like a direct connection to it? But definitely I think I had a piece, and I was rereading it in preparation for this, but I wrote about, the visa process and the situation I found myself in, where I did not expect to want to cover U.S. politics when I first got here. And then 2 years in, I realized that I was a politics junkie and that I really wanted to keep doing this. And then I had to figure out how to do it and navigating the U.S. immigration system and the U.S. visa system at that age was so scary. And I wrote that, and I think about it a lot because I think it was one of the pieces that really resonated with a lot of people, even though they didn't personally relate to it, because a lot of my readers were American. But it was incredible. And I think that's how I found out, like, a lot of people don't know how hard it actually is to not be American in the country. And that one was so easy to write. I think I started writing it on my phone and then just, showed up to the office and was like, let's run this. And that was just probably the easiest bit of writing I've ever done. But it was really hard to publish because I was just really bearing my soul to the entire internet.
So that's so interesting. So that you initially couldn't see yourself going into politics, but it was like a life experience that kind of brought you into it. Your own experience that fascinated you about politics and drove you there. What did you envision if it wasn't politics? What road of writing and reporting would you have gone down?
I definitely would have gone back to Mexico because I'm also Mexican, but I would have gone back to Mexico and been a foreign correspondent there. I always wanted to keep writing in English. I unfortunately have to say my writing in Spanish is not as good as my writing in English. There's too many accents. But
one of your tweets was about how do you spell indictment in Spanish?
Like I don't know how to say indictment in Spanish. I still don't. It's been 4 and I still don't know. And it's stuff like that. Like whenever I'm put on Spanish radio or Spanish TV, I'm like, oh, give me a second. I need to have like a cheat sheet with all of this stuff translated. And it drives my mom insane. She's like, I cannot believe that you don't know how to say this in Spanish. But that was the original plan. And I still hope to one day. I know I'm talking big game about hopes and dreams. I mean, I'm relatively early career, but I do hope to one day go back and cover Latin America for the Post. Like that's one of my goals. But I really just got sucked into the world of U.S. politics. And for now, that is literally everything I want to do. Wow.
Something else that's worth noting is I've heard you as a guest on shows that are more in the conservative media ecosystem. And we were talking about, these notions, enemy of the people being thrown around in the Trump era in particular. I was wondering if you've had to face adverse or just like generally unfriendly circumstances, whether it's on these other media appearances or when you're trying to interview subjects that aren't fans of the Washington Post. Like, what kind of obstacles have you faced?
Yeah, it's happened a few times. I can't say like every time I go out, something. That's definitely not my experience to continuously be harassed. That's not a thing. But it has happened sometimes where, covering certain topics or going to certain rallies and just, being told like, I don't want to speak to you, or like kind of handed off color comments. And I think I do a good poker face, but my end goal is remembering that I'm there to, get the story and get as many voices as I can into it. And I think that I really rationalized the way I do this. And I've really said, the end result is trying to let readers know why people think this way, why people are saying this. My motto is that at the end of the day, the reader will have enough information, enough context to make their own decision about a situation. And I think that, when I was younger, when I was, 2017 and at the Texas Tribune and covering the first few months of the Trump administration, it happened more than it happens now that I would get some off-color comment and just kind of have to be like, you know what? Okay, fine. Like, you can say that, but I still would like to know your thoughts on this situation. And we can, talk about that later or maybe not, but like, there's a reason why I'm trying to talk to you. And, I think it's made it easier. I don't know if it's a long-winded way of saying, but it's made it easier, to go up now to Congress and talk to a lot of lawmakers that might be saying certain things about, issues that kind of impact me directly, but still being able to talk to them and have a normal conversation and try to understand, where they're coming from and, why voters decided to have them represent them. And I think that is very important because I can't just ignore a lawmaker because they say X, Y, and Z. I still need to talk to them. I still need to get them for my story and get their voice. And so I think this idea of, cutting figures out of stories just because they, might be saying certain things on the record or in public that, you don't personally agree with or personally affect you, like that is doing a disservice to readers. And so I really, hear them. There's a saying in Spanish, dentro de un oído fuera el otro, like I just like, okay, you're going to say that, fine, but please help me understand your viewpoint better.
That's interesting. So, do you find that it's very divided, like whether it's Republican elected officials versus Democratic versus elected officials, or their staff, or is it one-sided? Are you able to cultivate those relationships on both sides of the aisle? And it's more on an individual basis, like this individual congressperson or this individual staffer is more averse to having a conversation, or is it really red and blue, and the red side, the Republicans, are very anti-Washington Post? Or am I thinking of it too simplistically?
I definitely think that it's not, like, once you get to the personal level, once you're talking to someone one-on-one, like in front of you in person, like, they don't say no. They definitely want to chat. They definitely understand the role that the media has in, their goals, and also they understand the goals that we have as media. And I think that once you take the Twitter off things, once you take the internet off things, once you take the radio or video clips or the things that, go viral and get people riled up, once you're just two human beings speaking on the halls of Congress, that is so easy. That is so simple to be like, listen, can we talk about this thing that you want, this bill that you want to pass, or can we talk about this issue that's making the news? And they'll actually, most of the time, give you an honest opinion, like talk to you. Even, sometimes it's really nice when their spokespeople aren't around, because then they are even more candid. And so it really is good to go up to the Hill and see these people as, humans, and talk to them one-on-one, and just go up to them and say, hi, congressman or woman, how are you doing? How's your day going? Like, what did you do, last week? Like, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, also, do you have a comment on this? Sometimes they'll be like, no comment, sorry, and then move on. But a lot of the time they do take their time and say, hi, like, yeah, let's talk about this, or like, this is my thought. And sometimes it's the same thing they tweeted, and at least you have it on the record in person. But sometimes you get to push them a little deeper and be like, but why do you believe that? And I think that that's, a great thing that I would love to convey more to readers, that at the end of the day, they have these big, some of these folks have these big personalities online, whether it's left or right. I'm talking like both sides here, but like they have these big personalities online because they have to do that to continue promoting their brand, to continue promoting their campaign, to continue, getting folks to support them. But once you meet them one-on-one, they're just like you and me, and they have their own thoughts and their own opinions. And more often than not, they do want to get things done. It's just more so, getting, wrapped up in this whole world of campaigns and elections and bureaucracy that makes them seem so unapproachable when they're really not.
I'll take your word for it, but there's got to be at least one or two congresspeople I think of that they're there mostly because it does things for, they get more followers online.
Yeah, I definitely
I got,
Yeah, I'm being very idealistic, but I feel like, the longer you're there, and I haven't been on the Hill that long, I definitely have colleagues who are way more experienced at this than me. I still get a little nervous approaching certain figures. But I think a lot of the time I have had a lot of luck getting these folks to say something, but a lot of the time it's just, to continue being elected and being in office, and they really want to keep just doing that. And so it's a fine line. Yeah.
I don't have to mention any particular names, not that it would rhyme with Schmarjorie, Schmeller, Schreen. But I just say, she's like, this will be great for my Twitter feed. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so one other question of kind of how you deal with it personally. So when you have that hard day, when you have a difficult encounter, how have you learned how to deal with that? You shared some of your mottos and stuff, but do you learn from your colleagues, other reporters, or your editors, or is it something like you go and you do meditation at the end of every day? How do you deal with it personally when things, because things I'm sure can get rough out there some days?
Yeah. I run a lot. I'm a really bad I can't meditate. It's really a thing I've been struggling with. I've been a Catholic my entire life, and it's really hard for me to even do the basic the
rosary, the whole prayer.
That does not relax me at all. But I run a lot, and I feel like if I don't run, I will be more stressed. And I think that that's the one time I have to clear my mind. And, DC is a beautiful city to run in, and there's a lot of runners here. And there's a joke that, DC runners will run through everything. I feel like during the January 6th insurrection, there were still people running. And so that's very helpful. And I do think I'm very lucky to be in a newsroom that is so supportive of, understanding that sometimes days are rough and that it's okay to, take a step back from a story. I think that I'm not saying the Post has always been perfect at that, but at least in recent years, I think that there's been a better understanding that you can have a good reporter if the reporter is overwhelmed and burned out. And at least in my team, I think that I've been really lucky to have editors who understand that. And it's been, a rough couple of years in terms of everything. But I think that, since I joined the Post, we've had a pandemic, we've had 2020 election, we've had the midterms that were very, just everything was happening all at once. And we had the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe. Like, it's a lot of things at once. And then all the Trump indictments, it's all of these, and the insurrections, all of these things. And if you don't take a break, sometimes you lose sight of, that fact that we're still just humans, and that, sometimes I wonder, people who are not, tuned to politics 24/7, like, how do they live? It must be really nice. But if you lose sight of the fact that you have to take a break, then you're never going to be at peace. So I'm really happy that it's a lesson I learned early on in my career, at this point in my career, before, I spent the next 25 years doing this, that it's okay to say no to certain assignments, because you have to, restart and reset. But sometimes you just don't want to take a break because you want to continue being on a story, and that's, good, but you can't do that all the time. You have to take a step back. Yeah.
Interesting stuff. So since you mentioned the indictments, I've noticed that a bunch of your stories, you're one reporter on these major stories that the Post is doing. So first, I was curious if you could shed some light on that process. Like, when a number of reporters are on a story together, how does it work? Like, if you could take us behind the scenes and share with our listeners more about the whole process, from getting the assignment to what's involved in gathering the information on the story, to how you collaborate with your colleagues at the Post on a big story like that. Just take us behind the curtain. How does that all work?
Definitely, and I think this is a product of where we are at now in terms of technology and the internet, and people being used to being fed tidbits of information little by little as we get it, instead of a full story 3 hours after the fact. The world of breaking news and Twitter and all of that has really shaped people's appetite for news. And so what my team does is that we're the breaking news team. So there's 5 of us, reporters to editors, and we're always the ones that are tapped in whenever a story that's going to be a day-long thing happens, like the indictment this week. We were just waiting for it to drop, so we started early in the day this thing that we call a live update feed, a live blog, basically, where the beat reporters, the people who are been following the case, the Georgia case specifically right now, they are queued in, they are joining us, but every major update that happens, one of us will be assigned to write it. That day the indictment dropped at 10 p.m. And so we were all still online, just waiting. We divide the indictment up, see who reads what page. Anything that sticks out, you flag it to the editors and someone will write it, or just watching the feed of the judge receiving the documents and, writing color based on that, and just important things that readers should know. For example, the fact that Georgia lets you film inside the courthouse. That's very new, and we didn't have that for the other indictments, and just important to let the readers know that this is major, that we can be able to see and track this document as it makes its way to the judge. Little things like that ultimately will make their way into the longer story that the beat reporter will write, but that we have the chance to put up online immediately. And so people don't have to be, refreshing Twitter or any other social media, but they can just continue being on our site and following it step by step. And that's the kind of thing we do for a lot of things like debates, the other indictments, we've done that too. I think we do it too on the other side for foreign. I mean, I'm not on that team, but with Ukraine and the war, we usually do. The Post usually will have something like that set up for immediate news for people. But it's very fast paced. It's definitely a thing that we're all on the Slack at the same time. It's kind of be chaotic, but I think we've really fine tuned the communication in there. And again, I live for that, just being able to move fast. It's my favorite aspect of the job, because it definitely gives you a rush. It definitely has some psychological element there where I really get into it. And it's fun because I think that, being a general politics reporter, as I am, I get to touch a lot of different topics. Whenever Congress is in session, I like to focus on that, but I'm also covering Biden, but I'm also covering indictments and elections and all of these things, which helps. I mean, I'm just very curious and very happy to jump from thing to thing. And I think at some point I would like to maybe just focus on one thing. But for now, it really works because I feel like I can talk about a lot of these things. But it definitely takes a little more sitting with a beat and developing more sources. And that's a lot of my other colleagues do.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So I risk the possibility of really getting into the reporter weeds, but to kind of pick up on what you were saying, there was a story, I think I saw it today or maybe yesterday, that you did this one solo, if I remember correctly, on Sarah Longwell and her group doing a campaign to influence Republicans to continue supporting Ukraine. So, okay. So this is my in the weeds question. So, if you're looking for quotes or background information, do you already know someone like Sarah Longwell or Bill Kristol? Or I think you got a quote not from Kevin McCarthy, but from Kevin McCarthy's representative. Do you already have those relationships? And if not, how do you approach those, the key people in the story? Is it someone that maybe you could ask one of your colleagues, hey, do you know so-and-so? And can I, how does that all work? How do you access those people?
It's a combination of all of those. I think for this specific story, like I've already been in touch with Longwell and Partners, which is Sarah Longwell's communications firm, and they were saying like, yeah, we have this campaign coming up, like we could connect you to Sarah. And I'd previously spoken to Sarah once about another story because I know that she very much is in the camp of getting the Republican Party not to nominate former President Trump again. And so we've spoken before about that, and I think that this time, with the appropriations fight coming up, like they have been very much focused on making sure that Ukraine continues receiving support, which is something that is really dividing the GOP right now. And so in that case, like they connected me with her, and then they had two other sources that are, as they describe Americans who have opinions on this, and I was really thankful because I anytime I can talk to like a normal person about the topics that are all these lawmakers are talking about, like that is my favorite thing, because that is who really matters here, is like who any regular American has to say about these things. And that's usually the case. I think for Congress and lawmakers, we definitely have contacts to their spokespeople or their communication staff, and if I don't have it, then I reach out to another reporter who does. I will say, like, I'm in awe of how well connected a lot of like the reporters are at the Post. Like, we all kind of know some person, or someone knows a person who knows a person, and that's the beauty of journalism in a newsroom that is like as resourceful as the Post. And at the end of the day, we always find a way to find these people, but it's piecing it together like that. I think that it's easier when Congress is in session because you can just go and ask. But right now, when everyone's just spread out, it's easier just to reach out to their spokesperson.
Yeah. All right. So I do need to ask you, this is about the newsiest thing that I'm going to ask you. Some people that I'm having conversations with about the 4 criminal indictments that Trump now has, that people are starting to get clear as mud. So if you wouldn't mind, give us a summary of where the 4 major criminal cases are, leaving aside the civil suits that Trump and his businesses face. But where do things stand now with the criminal case? The criminal cases.
Yes, I'm gonna have to start from the newest one. That's the one I've been talking about for the last 48 hours. But so right now, Fannie Willis, district attorney of Fulton County in Georgia, she has filed this indictment against Trump and 18 others, which is a pretty sweeping piece of document that is. And that, I think, might be the most tricky for Trump. That might present the biggest legal threat to him, just because it's a state case. Like, if he becomes president, which he very much still can, he can't order the DOJ to stop, doing that investigation because it's in the state. Also, Georgia is one of 2, I think, states in the country that doesn't have governor pardon. So, like, he can't even go ask the Republican governor of Georgia to pardon him if it comes to that. So it's definitely, in my opinion, the biggest legal threat the president faces. It's going to take a while, though. I think that Willis wants to, have a trial in 6 months, and given the scope of this of this indictment and how many people are involved, and the fact that it's just not Trump charged, it's 18 others, it probably will take longer than that. Already we're seeing Mark Meadows, who's also indicted, his former chief of staff. He already is saying, like, hey, I don't want to be, doing this in state court. Like, can we do this federally? Because I was a federal employee when this happened, so I should be allowed to move this to the federal court. And so already little things like that are going to start to chip away at the timeline that Willis has set. Again, all of this could happen, will likely happen even after, it could happen after the election. And so very much a chance that, if former President Trump is reelected, that he's going to be dealing with this during his presidency. And then you have, Jack Smith, who did he's the DOJ special counsel. He did 2 investigations, one into January 6th, and the other one into the classified document. Of those 2, the January 6th one is more serious. And even though it touches on the same things that Willis is looking at, Jack Smith only charged Trump. And I think they're still working on setting, when that's going to, go to trial, when it's going to be in court. But the thing with that case is that it's more, quick and just, he didn't have as much time as Willis to put this case. So I think it's 4 charges. And one of the experts that the Post spoke to said, Jack Smith's case is the Spark Notes and Fani Willis is the novel. And you kind of get the gist of what happened from Jack Smith, but Fani Willis is the one that's going to paint a picture. Right. So we'll see how that goes. But again, if Trump is elected president again, he could very much go to the DOJ and say, hey, let's not talk about this anymore. And same with the classified documents case, which, again, all of this stuff happened after the 2020 election. He really, could have just turned those documents in and there would have been no case for the documents case. But that one is also, I think, awaiting for the trial to start. And then there's the very first one, which is the case of, paying for
Stormy Daniels,
for Stormy Daniels, yes. And I think that one, I'm so sorry, but my brain has already reset. I feel like I can read one article and be like, yes, that's where we're at. But I feel like that was the one that was unprecedented. The 3 other indictments, I feel like once you have one indictment, you can no longer say that this is unprecedented because you already have one indictment. So I think we always say, like, these are unprecedented times. And I'm like, no, I feel pretty precedented at this point. By the time that the Georgia indictment dropped on Monday, we already knew what we were doing. And the interesting part about the Georgia one is that he's going to get fingerprinted and there's going to be a mugshot and he has to turn himself into a jail. That's like, more color, and he's definitely going to use that in his favor. And we know that his base is not going to let go. This is not going to scare them away. And so I think that might just add to the fact that this is a former president who's being indicted again. But other than that, it just, there's so many at this point that, remembering every single detail can get a little murky.
Yeah, sure. Well, the Post has been so good. You in particular and your team have been so good about keeping things clear, creating flow charts and graphs so we could keep track of it and the dates and the calendars. And so that's all great. I was curious, though, if I haven't read everything, but have you gone into the field and spoken to voters, whether it's Trump supporters or other individuals in the electorate to see how because that's a huge part of the overall story. How is the electorate responding to these? Have you done any of that work, or if not, have you been checking in with your colleagues to see, to get a feel for how the electorate is responding to these indictments?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to actually go out there beyond DC. I think that because I'm so focused on just the daily politics section, I have asked lawmakers, like, how do you feel about indictment number 2? But again, every chance I get to talk to an actual civilian about this, it's a treat for me, and I really do want to do more of that. But I do know that a lot of my colleagues haven't had that opportunity, especially right now with the Iowa fair going on. Like, a lot of our campaign reporters are out there asking voters about this, and Maeve Reston, who's one of she just got hired by the Post, and she's amazing, and she's covering a lot of these campaigns. She wrote a story, it was either last night or today, but it was basically about how the base is still, the Trump's base is still there for him, and like nothing about this has changed their mind. And then you get to talk to, other the never Trumpers and the people who are actually horrified by this, and they're saying, like, we don't know what else we can do to convince people that we have to drop him. And we're talking about people who probably are looking towards Asa Hutchinson or Chris Christie or Will Hurd, but all of these folks are, pulling very behind. And even those who thought that Ron DeSantis was a better option, or who would be the next, standard bearer for the Republican Party, have grown a little disillusioned that Ron DeSantis is out there saying, defending Trump and standing by him instead of using, or seeing all these indictments and saying, I can be Trump if I use this in my favor. And he's obviously still sticking by the president. So I think that there's this feeling against all these never Trumpers, like the GOP that doesn't want to continue going down the Trump lane of, well, what do we do now? Like, nobody's taking this as seriously as they should.
Yeah. So going back to elected officials, Congress people, other people, politicians, and this is a very unscientific theory, but I often get the impression that they wake up and either speak to their comms team or they read whatever bullet points WinRed sends them or Vote Blue sends them. And as a reporter, it's very hard to get them off of the talking points, those bullet points that WinRed will send them. Are you able to penetrate past that? And if so, how do you do it?
It's very true that they sometimes just parrot the same thing, or they just repeat what has been, the message of the day, basically.
Yeah.
But I think that, and I really hope to continue developing this because, again, I feel like I'm on the hill as a newbie, but there's a way of forming that relationship where you get to, but is that how you really feel? Is that what you actually think? Often that's when, on background kicks in or, like a Republican familiar with the situation said, and then you can really hear them say their actual, like maybe it's still part of the messaging, but they're like add a little bit to it. Sometimes when something chaotic happens and they're kind of off guard or like, they're like tired or they're like, actually, think that they would move the needle forward to just say what's on their mind, like they'll say it. And I think we can probably maybe expect some of that in the appropriations fight. But oftentimes it's a little bit of patience, a little bit of knowing how to, get them in the right, mood or ask the right question. But I think often we just turn to, a Democrat familiar with the situation or a Democrat in the room said, and I know that is tricky because readers want to know who's actually saying this. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to negotiate, is it worth getting this actual real thought on here? Versus, like, does it add to the story? Does it really, show that there is a different lane here that it's not being reported elsewhere? And I think that's kind of when we kick in and say, okay, we can use this on background. And that's the thing about journalism. I feel like people are just like, all these terms that we use, and then we throw out at readers, and readers are like, I don't know what that means. And that's, on the record, off the record, on the background, all of this stuff. It's a little silly, but yeah.
No. Actually, I did have a question for you about the business, the news business. Just in the time that you've graduated from Northwestern and Texas Tribune, the news business has adapted and evolved. I'm curious if you have thoughts about how good journalism is actually being done, or how good journalists are overcoming these unique challenges of today. How it's different from when you first started, and where you see things going from here.
Yeah, I think I started at a point where people were still recovering from 2008, and a lot of things had shut down, or a lot of things were being done differently. The digital pivot was still happening. It's still happening right now, but I think we're in a better place in terms of like what do we want digitally. Again, what my team does is live update feed. That's definitely a product of realizing that readers want things now, and like it's better if we get their attention now and then offer them a longer piece later with more details and like a bigger, piece of paper that you can hold at breakfast in the printed paper. And definitely there's still an appetite for like the printed product. And I think I'm definitely one of those journalists who like loves the print paper. But it's also, time to be real and understand that most people don't get the newspaper delivered to their front step anymore. And so I think that, especially for my generation of journalists, like we went to journalism school and they were still very much taught like the old school journalism of, writing a lead and like obviously we still do that, but like taking your time with the story, and obviously we still do that, but a lot of the time it also involves like moving quick and tweeting and pulling things from YouTube and pulling things from Facebook and pulling things from all the social medias in the world and like trying to figure out if this thing is real or fake, because a lot of things on the internet are fake. And a lot of those skills that I think we've only pick up by doing instead of, they're not really being taught in a college classroom right now. Also just being able to communicate directly with the audience has been a game shifter. I think that before the most you got was like a letter sent to your desk and like people were angry, but now you get immediate feedback on your inbox every single time you publish a story, or Twitter And so that really has changed the stakes because readers can approach you, which is good because you get, to hear their thoughts, and that kind of can help you guide your reporting. But also it's kind of nerve-wracking sometimes when you publish something, you're like, oh God, like what is this gonna, start in my inbox? But I do appreciate being able to hear that feedback. I really love it when readers have, good commentary, good criticism. I always welcome that. But I definitely think that we're still in the adjustment period of realizing how we can make money out of being digital. I think a lot of the time we get this is off behind a paywall. Like, how am I supposed to read it? It's like, yeah, like, I'm really sorry that there is a paywall for the story, but like, we do need to keep the lights on. And like, I know that at the Post, we, have all this money from Jeff Bezos, and that was, something that really revitalized the newsroom. And every time I bring Jeff Bezos up, I have to say, like, he doesn't have any involvement with our coverage, and we're still remain very much independent. But not every billionaire is out there buying a newspaper, and it's devastating to see, layoffs at newspapers that I've loved my entire life, the LA Times, I think that all of the Miami Heralds and the Houston Chronicles of the world, like a lot of those places are going through layoffs, and USA Today. And so I think that I don't know, I leave it up to the NBA people to figure out how to make money out of journalism, but it really is that thing where I think the model of the future is profit model. I think that when you see the Texas Tribune, which is funded by donors, when you see ProPublica, when you see all these, like the Baltimore banner over in Baltimore, that are, funded by the community, funded by people who actually know that local journalism is what, is keeping their cities running. I think that makes me hopeful that is a new model that we should be looking more into. But again, when you have big newspapers like the Post and the Times, like obviously those are not particularly keen to I mean, we already have profit money, but it's definitely the local papers that need more of the community support.
So I was asking Mike Leon about this, and I'm curious if you have thoughts or advice to news consumers. How can we be better consumers of the news, be more discerning about, what we're reading and what is good journalism and what is good reporting, what are facts, how can we be better at being good consumers of the news?
Yeah, I think my first piece of advice is not to just be loyal to one publication or outlet. I think sometimes people are like, well, I have a subscription to X, I don't need Y and Z. And I think that is a disservice, not to the newspaper, but to yourself. Like, I think that you should be getting your news from different places and have a media diet that includes points of views that you don't necessarily agree with. I think that, I will tune into both MSNBC and Fox News because I want to get to know what both sides are saying. I want to get to know, who are they bringing up as commentators? Who are they bringing up as pundits? Who are they bringing up as the lawmakers who want to talk to them? And I also think that something that I think has made the polarization so much feel more intense in the country is that people are only tuning into politics. And whenever I open the Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, there's a whole other wealth of stories out there that have nothing to do with what Congress is doing or what the president is doing. There's incredible things being written about also a lot of the economics and race and other issues that are very, quote unquote hot button issues in the arts section, in the sports section. And I think that you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not also trying to tune into those storylines and see why the culture shift is feeling this way or that way. I think that helps us understand where we are in this moment in time, because politics is not just, confined to Washington, D.C. or the State House. It's also part of, the art that we're putting out there and, how baseball teams are developing.
Yeah.
And so it basically the advice here is just don't take one lane, like try all the lanes. Just also, and this is like a Twitter thing, but it's definitely like touch grass. Like I think like sometimes we get so heated or we get so intense about certain things, and we're like on Twitter refreshing the feed or like, looking at the news and just always online. And sometimes whenever that happens to me, I'm like, I need to go outside and like look at a tree and like look at the sky and remember that like you're just a human being and you can't carry all of that inside, and you can't like let these conversations and these issues like, cost you a level of stress or a level of annoyance that you're carrying it onto your relationships with real people in the world.
That's great advice. That is really good advice. Get outside, look at the sky, listen to a bird. That's funny. All right, so I have one more. I'm going to ask you for some more advice. This is what I call the TPNR question, talk politics and religion question. What do you think each of us can do to be better able to share space with, have better conversations with, even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So people who think differently than we do, who have different beliefs than we do, who read a different newspaper than we do, and get their news from different sources. How can we be better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
I definitely think it's possible because I do it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But and it's definitely not an easy thing. I feel like I had a harder time, keeping my lion from jumping out when I was, starting off. And again, I'm still starting off. I'm still not a pro in this business at all. But like, it definitely takes a lot of patience and a lot of knowing where your own boundaries are, what your limit is. And if you're starting to get to that place where like, okay, my like heart rate's going up, like I'm starting to get like a little peeved at this person, like then you draw back and be like, you know what, like let's pick this up again in a few seconds. What do you think about what the Nationals did yesterday? And I think that is always, and it also happens whenever I'm on like an interview or like a TV hit or something. I'm like, okay, like, but let's talk about this other thing that is kind of related, but not really. But also just a level of tolerance and patience of knowing that this other person has their own set of facts and information, and they're coming from they're interpreting the news from the place that they're coming from, and the background and the education and the family that they have and the things that they've interacted with life, and they're never going to be the same things that you've interacted with in life. Even if you guys are like identical twins, like you still have different life experiences that have colored the way that you interpret things now. And I think that oftentimes we forget that, even if we might have very similar backgrounds, like there was some life experience that they had that you didn't, and that's why they think this way. And they might not even recognize that. They might not even know that that's where the switch turned on. But I think that it definitely takes some taking a step back and realizing that no one's ever going to think the same way you do. And while it's nice to be around people who do think the same way you do, it's very much a disservice to you and the world if you're only around those people. And I'm not saying, go, be best friends with someone who's being insulting or hurting or hurtful to you or someone you love or a community you love. Like, that's not really also fair to yourself. Like, that's definitely also doing some damage to yourself. But it doesn't mean that you shut down an entire group of people just because you have this belief that they are never going to understand you. I feel like once you get off, again, the internet, or you want to confront someone face to face, the claws are not out. Like, people remember that you have a face, that you're your own person. And most times, again, this is not a generalizing, but like most times you'll have, even if it's not a pleasant conversation, a doable conversation. Again, I've had times where I'm like, you know what? You're not going to listen to me. My point's not going to come across. I can't change your mind about this. I'm going to leave this conversation out. And again, there's 7 billion people in the world, and you can't get to have a good conversation with everyone all the time. But sometimes some people you just can't, and I'm really sorry, and it really sucks because you kind of wish that everyone could just say their word and make peace with it. But it's better to, draw the line and say, okay, I tried. Good to know you. Moving on.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And, mostly just keeping in mind that people have their views, and it's based on context, their life experience, their, what they've been through and who they know and who they're hanging out with and where they're getting the news. So contextualize it. But you also gave me a really good idea. Maybe a way that we can keep the indictments straight is by naming the 4 indictments after 4 of the 5 National East baseball teams. So we have the Washington Nationals indictment. We have the Atlanta Braves indictment. That's really serious. We have the Florida Marlins indictment, and they're really, you gotta start looking at that. And then you got the New York Mets indictment. You just don't have to take seriously at all. I'm just totally kidding.
Actually, no, I saw that again, not to bring it back to Twitter, but I did see that on Twitter. And I think it was like only Philly doesn't have an indictment. And I was like, Philly got to get on it.
Yeah, seriously, there's got to be something in Philly, right? Or Bucks County at the very least. Come on.
There's still time.
All right. So do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, actually, I just kind of want to know how this podcast came to be. I think that when I first started, I thought we would also be talking about religion, which is a thing that I also, love to talk about because, as I mentioned, I was raised Catholic. I've always been Catholic, and it's interesting to be, a Catholic reporter in the age of Joe Biden, and also, before this, Nancy Pelosi. But how did this podcast come to be, and why? What have you heard in the last few? And I heard a few, but what is the best advice you've gotten from other people about how to talk politics and religion with others?
Yeah, so I started this 3 years ago, but it was something that I've been thinking about for much, much longer. I grew up in an observant Jewish family, but I became a born-again Christian in my late 20s. So when that happened, I'm sure you can imagine that I had to have very difficult conversations with my family about why I became a Christian. And they were very fraught conversations, especially in the early days. But also because I was a Christian, I was going to church and becoming friends with people that I could see had very strong opinions about social and political issues, even more so than the theological issues that I had strong convictions about, which brought me to the point of becoming a Christian. And I ended up finding myself in very challenging conversations about politics in my Bible studies and in Sunday school class and, friends from church. So I realized that perhaps more so than any particular issue, the way we were talking to each other about the issues, or the way we were talking about people we thought disagreed with us about these issues, or just the tendency to think that people who disagree, like in the church, people who weren't pro-life, there's a tendency to mischaracterize, to generalize, to vilify, So I've had this this burning passion, this drive to figure out how to do it better, And it's not new in the Trump era. This is, we've been bad at having these conversations in healthy ways for many years, but certainly the Trump era has exacerbated that. And I thought, if there's one thing I can do is, even for myself, because I'm not the Bruce Lee of talking politics and religion. I don't have the 3rd degree black belt in this thing. So part of it was just from me learning from other people who are doing it really well. Which goes to the second part of your question. One of the, I keep on referring back to Monica Guzman. I don't know if you know her. She's a brilliant journalist. She is also very involved with an organization called Braver Angels. Her book that came out about a little less than a year ago, December of 2022, I never thought of it that way. And it's all about talking to people who disagree with you about certain things. She was focusing mostly on politics, but the idea is to have this radical curiosity, this, to approach people instead of approaching people in a transactional or a contentious way and looking to score points, or I'm going to say the perfect thing and it's going to convince them and everybody else who's listening, to go about these conversations with a very curious disposition. Oh, wow. And with leaving open the possibility that somebody will say something that will lead you to say, I never thought of it that way. So I think one of the ways that we can get there, and John Roush talked about this recently when he came on the program, what they really talk a lot about at Braver Angels, the organization that Monty is a part of now, is to, instead of doing that thing where you have a comeback or you want to correct somebody or shoot somebody down or cut them down or what have you, to ask the question, kind of what you were talking about before, where you say, that's interesting. Tell me about what happened, like your life experience. So you've lived this long and have certain professional experiences, and what happened in your life to get you to the point that leads you to these conclusions? What was it about your upbringing or your beliefs that brought you to hold on to these positions? And what that does is it opens up the conversation to someone's story, and we as human beings, we gravitate to stories. And then what that also does is it turns the conversation into something that's less transactional or more contentious and more relational. Because I think we can do better when we're in relationship with others, as opposed to constantly being throwing rocks at people, especially those that we love. So so if you haven't looked up Monty's work, Monica Guzman.
No, you guys not.
Braver Angels, and her book is I Never Thought of It That Way. So,
okay,
yeah, good stuff. So, is there anything important I forgot to ask you?
I think that's kind of it. I think, oh my gosh, I feel like I could have talked for a while. As I mentioned, like I always get to talk about the day's news, but never really about how I ended up here.
Yeah.
But no, I think I'll just say, like, I really got sucked into this world in 2016. Like that, the beginning of that election was the first time I ever covered U.S. politics seriously. And the first thing I did when I was, starting my program here in D.C. was, what are the main issues that Democrats and Republicans disagree on? Like, I truly was coming in blind. I mean, I definitely, again, was raised in an American curriculum, and took AP U.S. history and all these things. But, like, I truly did not understand why everyone was so angry all the time. Like, I truly, like, coming from El Salvador, I was like, you guys live in the United States of America. What are you talking about? Obviously, like, I'm still a very idealistic person. I definitely consider myself an optimist. So, like, I've obviously learned a lot since 2016, and I understand why people are upset. But it was that thing that I came in thinking, yeah, the U.S. has figured it out. No, the U.S. has not figured it out. They definitely have figured some things out better than others, but it's definitely a beautiful thing to be able to, like, witness and write about and, like, write the first copy of history of, like, the American experiment, because it's definitely an experiment. It's definitely, I think we're in an era right now where, like, a lot of the testing is going one way or the other, and we're trying new things that we never tried before, and, like, definitely, again, overall an unprecedented era. But I feel very lucky that I get to see it, especially as a non-citizen. Like, again, sometimes I think that makes it a little easier because I can, not take it super personally, but at the same time, we're talking about issues that affect, Latinos, that affect immigrants, that affect women, that affect Salvadorans, which I am, and all of these things that are my identities. And so it really is a time to be covering this. Yeah. And I sometimes don't really talk about, like, the whole idea of the American dream, but I never thought that I would be doing this. And so when I, preached this idea of, like, patience when talking these issues with people whom I had different opinions than you, like, I know I'm sounding like an extreme optimist, or, like, I know that sometimes some people might say, like, oh, well, you're ignoring the fact that some of the things that people might say can be hurtful. And I'm very aware that a lot of the times, a lot of these things that some people's opinions might be really hurtful. And I'm not saying you get to excuse that, but you can't fully understand what's going on in America if you just want to, ignore that. You have to maybe not engage with it, but you have to at least try to understand it, and where that's coming from. Yeah. Yeah,
it's funny. You're like, hey guys, you guys need to come on a run with me or something. You do the meditation or the yoga or whatever. Yeah. But you're right. There's a tendency to get upset about everything. Like, why are we upset about Bud Light and Barbie again? I don't know, but So I mean, there are some things that are really of historic importance. Yeah. The widespread efforts to overturn the election, the foundation of our democracy. This is stuff of historic importance, and you are writing, as you said, the first draft of history. So before we go, let folks know how we can follow you at the Washington Post, online, your wonderful Twitter feed, and all the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, clearly my favorite social media, even if it's a sinking ship, I'm going down with it. But I'm there as Mariana A_Alfaro. And then, Mariana Alfaro on the Washington Post. I'm on the breaking news team, and I hope to be on it for more time, because I really love, being able to witness all of this.
Yeah. And we will definitely put that in the show, some links in the show notes, so you can follow Mariana and her brilliant work. And thank you so much. This was so cool of you to come in and spend some time with us.
No, this is great.
Yeah, so I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you again. Like I said, when I'm in D.C., drinks are on me.
So. We can go to the Post Pub.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. All right. That'd be awesome. So as always, if you dig what we're doing here, please hit that subscribe button, leave a review and comments wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend about Talk Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. We are so easy to recommend. It's politicsandreligion.us. It's www.politicsandreligion.us, or you can find me online. I'm still on Twitter, but I'm more of a Threads guy these days, at Corey S. Nathan. That's Corey with an E and S's and Sam, at Corey S. Nathan. Now, go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.